Welcome to Marina Hills Animal Hospital, our staff meeting. Our medical moment today, we're going to talk about when pets bite people. It's sad, and it's frustrating, and it hurts. Frequently, when pets bite people, it's frankly from miscommunication between the pet and the person. Because most of the time, pets, I'm not talking about wildlife, I'm talking about pets, will signal their displeasure with what's happening before they bite. And if you're paying attention, you can avoid being bitten by stopping what you're doing and backing up. And that's true in the animal hospital setting, that's true if you're in your own home, if you're in a friend's house, that sort of thing. That's not always true, but it's often true. When animals bite people, there's several different parts of that conversation. The first is, what is going to happen to the person? Well, the person needs to seek medical attention, and the standard care would be to deal with a wound, prevent secondary infection, manage pain for the person who's been bitten. There is a rare but serious zoonotic disease that has the potential to be spread by a bite, and that is rabies. And because we live in a fabulous country with fabulous health care laws for people, rabies is quite rare here in the U.S., particularly here where we are in Southern California. Rabies in people, that is. Rabies is present in wildlife. Specifically in our town, rabies is present in the bat population. Last summer, right here at the regional park, officers found a dead bat and it tested positive for rabies. For public health reasons, we have the habit, the routine, the law that requires that dogs be vaccinated against rabies. And there's two purposes for that. In part, it's to protect dogs against rabies, and in part, frankly, it's to protect people against rabies, because it is rare for people to encounter wildlife. It is common for dogs to encounter wildlife because they think that's fun and cool, and if our pets are vaccinated, they serve as a buffer, as a barrier from the transmission of rabies from wildlife to people, because it's the dogs that are the go-betweens between the wildlife and the people in most home settings. So that's the reason why we vaccinate against rabies. So if a person is bitten by an animal in Orange County, California, that's where we are and that's what I know about, when that person seeks medical attention, the physician should file a bite report. If you witness a person being bitten, you can contact animal control directly and file what's called a bite report. And the purpose, again, primarily is to ensure that people are protected against rabies. Now, if your pet bites someone, whether that's someone in your family or somebody in the community, people often wonder what's going to happen. Is someone going to try to take my pet away from me? Is something bad going to happen? The first thing that's going to happen is that an animal control officer will assess the situation, and they are trained to recognize signs of and risks of rabies, because that's what this is all about, is protecting people against rabies, primarily. And so they're going to find out who got bitten, where were they bitten, what were they doing, was it the kind of interaction that you might expect someone to be bitten, or was it out of character? So for example, if you find a mother dog who's protecting their babies, and you get on the floor and crawl around on all fours and try to take one of the babies away from them, there's a good chance you're going to be bitten. And frankly, that would be common and somewhat normal behavior from a dog. However, if you are sitting at the park enjoying a sandwich, no, forget the food. If you're sitting at the park reading a book and a dog runs out of the bushes and unprovoked grabs you by the pant leg and bites you, that is rather unusual behavior, and that might spark a more concerned investigation into, is this a potential rabies situation? So part of the evaluation is the behavior, the interaction, what was happening. The goal primarily is to ensure that people are not going to get rabies. And the reason is that, from a public health standpoint, the reason is that you can only get rabies once and then you die. It is quite rare that people survive rabies. It's happened a few times, recently in recent history, but by and large, you get rabies once and then you die, which is why it's so serious and why we have laws in place to help protect people and communities. It turns out that if a dog or cat bites you and they are able to transmit rabies to you, they will die of their disease within 10 days. Now, interestingly, they could have contracted rabies many months ago, and they could even have rabies in their body, but if the rabies has reached their head, which is where their teeth are, which is where their salivary glands are, and they bite you, the virus will get to their brain and they will die within 10 days. And that's why we have a 10-day quarantine on the animal, the dog or the cat, after a person has been bitten. If during that 10-day period the pet shows no clinical signs of rabies, they did not transmit rabies to the person they bit. Does that make sense? Now, that doesn't mean they don't have rabies, interestingly, and my description does not apply to all animals, because different animals have different experiences when they have rabies. I'm not talking about horses and cows and pigs, though they all could have rabies. I'm not talking about wildlife. I'm talking about dogs and cats. So, when there's a bite on a person, the goal is to find the animal that did the biting and quarantine it, observe it for signs of rabies for a 10-day period. Where that quarantine occurs, where the pet is observed, depends on the situation, and that is at the discretion of the animal control officer. Their concern is higher in some situations, and they may require that the pet be quarantined at their facility under their direct observation. Their concern is lower in other situations, and they may allow the pet to be quarantined at an animal hospital or sometimes in someone's home. And again, that's at the discretion of the officer in charge. So that's the basic story on what happens if my dog bites somebody, my cat bites somebody. For that reason, cats should also be vaccinated against rabies. Though it is not the law and it's not required, cats are quite capable of encountering bats. In fact, I think given the opportunity, they would think that was quite enjoyable. And they're quite capable of transmitting rabies to people, which is why we, along with most animal hospitals, would recommend that cats be vaccinated against rabies. If you have other kinds of animals, you need to talk to your veterinarian about, does vaccination exist and would it apply? Is it helpful? Because while rabies affects a whole host of different animals, think mammals, that's a lot of different kinds of animals, it does not behave the same way. The vaccines are not available. It doesn't work the same way for all animals. Again, I'm talking about dogs and cats. Now, the other thing that can happen if a pet bites somebody is now the pet is known to the authorities as a pet that bites someone. And if that biting was out of context of what would be kind of normal and expected, then you start down the trail of vicious animal. And there's descriptions and laws and regulations that define when does that apply, and basically if you have an animal that is prone to biting in inappropriate and unexpected ways, as the owner, you need to be responsible to make sure that doesn't happen. That's the bottom line. And depending on the severity of the bite and the place and the timing and what happened, there would be a path from here to required confinement, right? Because if you can't control your pet, you need to keep it confined so it doesn't harm the community. And in rare cases, actual destruction of the pet is recommended or required. That is exceedingly rare, and that should not be your first thought when an animal bites somebody. I would hope that your first thought would be, how can I help to make sure that everyone is safe and the community is protected? So, that's the scoop. Any questions about that? Okay, good.